Happy Monday, everybody.
Hey, Bible study from Belize.
Welcome to a warm Monday afternoon.
Yeah,
Welcome the sun of my driveway, which faces south, has a little bit of meltage. Love that. Yeah, good day.
33 degrees. We are above freezing for the first time in a couple weeks.
Ooh-wee. Hope you're all doing well.
It is amazing how hanging out below zero for a couple weeks makes 30 feel really pretty good.
Changes perspective.
The sun helps too. And days are getting longer. We're well past midwinter.
Good
or
things.
End of winter, whatever it is.
Today is a day of buoyed spirits. Who knows what will happen in the days to come, but today seems pretty good.
I like that about, of the things I don't like about Iowa winters, I do like that somewhere around January, February, it usually throws you a bone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, hey, just hang it. It's coming. It's coming. Yeah. Little vitamin D.
So we had, to my knowledge, first on this daily Bible study
A
that we
first?
do. A first I'm aware of.
Let's hear it.
So we know that because the software stuff tells us that we've had visitors from all around the world. But to my knowledge, we've never been confident that the Bible study has been broadcast in a public space in the country of Belize. But thanks to our good friends, the Davises, who are traveling in Belize, they shared this. Look at this. This is Lynn. And
This is amazing.
That's you.
Those poor people at that restaurant are just wondering, like, what is happening?
So there you go. That's it's like a world premiere.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. God, it looks warmer than 30 degrees there.
It does. It does look
Look
warmer.
at that.
So anyways, thanks for passing that along, Davises. And so we have videographic proof that the podcast Bible study has made it all the way to Belize.
I wonder how you pronounce that.
Kay Kulker?
Maybe.
Yep. They also have sent us another video of a dolphin, but I'm going to save that for tomorrow because it's pretty cool. One video per day.
Is that the rule?
Yeah, it's like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, though that was 100% propaganda. This is one video a day keeps the doctor away.
Yeah. So Monday, what are we? We're on the, no, not quite. We have one Monday left in January. Getting closer to Super Bowl teams. One round of football left pre-Super Bowl. Winter games this weekend. There's a lot going on.
Do they keep pushing the Super Bowl back? It feels like it gets later and later all the time.
I don't think so. Historically, it was the last weekend in January, and it has now moved to February. Is it? I don't know when it is. I feel like they may put a dead weekend to give teams a chance to heal up. This year, I believe it's in Las Vegas.
See the cynical side of me?
February 11th. So I think the next round of games is next weekend, and that would then give 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, would it not? Yeah, because we're still in January.
The cynical side of me was thinking that it would have to do with money and that they could extend the season and therefore make more money because you would have more eyeballs and more advertising.
They may. I do think. I wish we had an NFL person. Like I'm not. I don't pay much attention. I do think they added a game or two to the schedule, maybe a game within the last several years. When I happened, the Sunday that I preached here at First Press was Super Bowl Sunday / Winter Games weekend at the time. I think that was the end of January that year. It was very cold, and I think we may have watched the Super Bowl from either was which hotel? Yeah, which one's by Walmart?
Ramada?
Ramada. We may have watched it from the Ramada, or we may have watched part of it there and then driven back to Sioux City with Jane's folks and watched the rest there because I think they were babysitting for us.
But you preached at Good News, right?
No, preached here.
Oh, you did?
My candidate sermon, I think I did at Lamar's at the Presbyterian Church. And then this was the Sunday that was sort of,
right.
That last hoop. We attended, we went, they tell you, you have all that stuff about try to keep it secret. So we did not come to worship that weekend. The weekend we visited, the first weekend we visited, we didn't come to worship here, but so many people had talked about Good News doing well and being kind of a major impact of the church that we attended there that weekend just to go see what everybody was talking about.
Right.
But the Sunday that following that Sunday that I preached was January. It was cold.
Right.
And it was Super Bowl. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up to even know who played. But again, I'm not for being involved in football. I'm surprisingly not a big fan. I don't remember stats and games. A couple of warm climates are getting well represented today.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, Donna.
Hi, Donna.
Hi,
I
Davis.
assume it's warm there.
But Linda and Carolyn and Judy, welcome to all of you up in the northern country. At least, Judy, do you leave in February?
Was there some talk about rain this week?
Yeah, really.
Because I don't know what the current thinking is on winter games and how happy you're on it. I would assume people are not parking.
I see that they have ice houses out on West Lake already.
Yeah, and I've seen vehicles out, but I would not expect it to be a parking lot yet.
Right.
That seems like maybe we're not ready for that, but I don't know how much ice is out there. So this is going to sound like a stupid question that I should go back to elementary school for. Does the lake freeze faster if the temperature is colder, or is that process essentially just a time value process? No, I think it does.
Okay.
I think it freezes faster the colder it is.
And then does wind chill have any effect on that? Because
I
would think
the initial freezing it would. Once there is a certain amount of ice above, then I'm not sure that it would.
Right.
Other than maybe it would cool that top layer even more and
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Excuse me.
Because it's amazing that ice is effectively floating on the lake. That's
right. Yeah, it's like the lake is covered in a boat.
Or just a curtain or something. Yeah, a buoy. My favorite. We haven't done it. We didn't do it this year, but some years we go out to Hogsback and there's a couple of small lakes there, and if you catch them just after they've frozen a little bit, you throw rocks and you get all these incredible noises, and I really enjoy it. It's just it won't do that. If you throw a rock now, it just sounds like thump, but then it makes these big musical notes, kind of.
Hello, Amber.
Hi, Amber.
Yeah, I got to admit to you that Winter Games is probably, by many people's estimation, underutilized in the Goecki household. We've just we kind of not found our Winter Games thing like some others have found.
They used to do some bike events. I've done those numerous times. When the girls were in the house, Jane had done the chocolate thing a few times. When she was at Cherish Center, we did go one time to the chili feed. We worked in the booth. That was the way to do it because then you're kind of away from the people. But when it gets slow, you can go eat chili.
Yeah, right.
I don't do a lot of winter games. We went down to the Kites last year.
Yeah.
Thought that was really interesting, but it was brutal cold.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the target audience for Winter Games, so not much of a partier, not much on crowds,
Yeah.
not much on doing things that are going to make me limp around for a couple days. So yeah, I'm not their guy.
I suppose someone could make an argument that at some point in my life, there would be some entertainment value in doing the plunge, but
I
don't know. That doesn't
actually-
just jump off the page.
I actually would do that. I don't have a problem with that, with the exception of I don't want to fight a crowd and go stand in line down
Wait.
there with people that are, doing whatever they're doing. And if you just said to me, let's go dig a hole and we'll jump in, okay. But I don't want to go down and be around all the people to do it. I don't want to be on somebody's
Yeah.
social media. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Not that they would put me. I just don't. It's just that's not. For
So
me.
you jump in and then you get out. That's the thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
do they have a ladder or something?
Well, they have some people in the hole.
Yeah, they've got
And
divers,
I
I've
think
heard.
Then I think there's a ladder that.
Are there wet? So how warm are you in a wetsuit in freezing water?
So there's two ways to do that. A wetsuit, you are warm-ish because a wetsuit works by allowing your body heat to heat water that's trapped in the suit, and you would use a thick suit, and you'd be okay. But what most of the people that are doing that in this day and age are going to use is called a dry suit, and it is waterproof. And so you could even wear an insulating layer underneath, and you'd stay reasonably warm in that. So it doesn't actually allow water in to touch your skin.
I mean, when you're talking about reasonable, are you talking like low 50s, like that kind of reasonable? Or, I mean,
oh no, maybe in a wetsuit you might. I don't know what that would be, but in a dry suit, I think a lot of people who get used to it are relatively comfortable in ice water.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not.
I'm sure there's a time limit because I mean it's.
They're not, but they're not suffering to be there. In other words.
I don't think so. Not massively.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not warm.
Well, yeah, and I want to put that in perspective. I'm not saying suffering for me. I'm saying suffering for them. Whatever the
But at that
scale
point,
is.
if you have an insulating layer, then it's just drawing heat out of your body via the temperature. You're not wet,
Yeah, right.
which increases that process.
All right. Well, there you go. I learned something new today. Glad to have you with us. Hope you're enjoying wherever this day finds you, and we will see you after the break. It's a Monday, and I pushed the wrong button. Hi. Now we'll do it for real.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back on a Monday as we start the week together through the Gospel of Luke. We find ourselves at the end of chapter 19. Jesus has entered Jerusalem, and that's a pivotal moment in the Gospels, but particularly in our case in the Gospel of Luke. Luke is going to spend some time talking us through what we call now on this side of Easter, Holy Week. And Luke doesn't quite line it out day by day, but there's a lot that happens. We get a lot of material. Luke is going to spend several chapters here, and so not quite 25%, maybe 15-20% of Luke's gospel is concerned with what happens this last week of Jesus' earthly life. So we jump into that today when we saw the triumphal entry, or the Palm Sunday, though Luke doesn't use that language. Today we start in verse 41, the first thing that Jesus does when he gets to Jerusalem. So verse 41, chapter 19, as he came near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, if you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they're hidden from your eyes. Indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up ramparts around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. They will crush you to the ground. you and your children with you, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. Interestingly, the first thing that Luke does is show us Jesus expressing lament, a grieving over Jerusalem, which in Jesus' words is a foreshadowing of being lost, that Jerusalem has this moment. The Messiah, the Savior, the Son of God is within the walls of Jerusalem. And not only is Jerusalem not moved and turned by that, it will be the site where that very same Messiah is put to death. And so, interesting, some of us know the story, Jesus weeping over Lazarus, and a lot of people would be maybe inclined to say that that's the only time Jesus cries. But here, Jesus literally, this word wept, he sheds tears over the holy city. And I think this is a significant moment, Michael, one we could read past, but one we shouldn't miss.
And actually, there's a wide variety, Clint, of versions or perspectives of this story that all, I think, are important. There's a historical perspective in which scholars who look at the Bible to study it, they have questions about when exactly did Luke write this and what was remembered about what Jesus had said. And so some will look to a passage like this and they'll talk about it in relation to the year 70 AD, when in fact Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman Empire after a series of political and military confrontations. So some will look to it for that purpose, and that's an interesting conversation. But I think one that we shouldn't forget, Clint, is that this is just chock filled with allusions to the Old Testament. Throughout the Old Testament, we see references to warnings for Israel, to warnings of destruction and of being dispersed. And of course, the people of Israel, throughout their time, if you have read your Old Testament, you know that they have already had a series of engagements where they've been militarily defeated, where the residents of Jerusalem have been sent away. And so here, as Jesus now turns and weeps over Jerusalem, it's a poignant moment because it's a reminder of those things that have come before. It's also a reflection of some of the really warnings and omens that have been given before. And then this all stands at the very moment where the Savior himself is both standing inside that city and reflecting upon the future of city. And that heightens the irony of this text, because Jesus has been proclaiming the kingdom of God. He's been showing the reality of that by what he does and says. And now when he's come to the city, he's been greeted in this triumphal procession. He now stands within the city, speaking and seeing ahead to the ultimate end, and it grieves him. And there's a deep, deep scriptural irony that it grieves him to see what will happen, despite the fact that the people should be able to see the revelation of God right in front of them, and they don't. They miss who's there, and that's only going to become a cause for greater irony. And by irony, I want to be clear, they're like a literary irony. It becomes, for us as the reader, a greater lapse between what we know should be and what turns out to be true in the story. And that has some powerful theological import and some lessons for us in that as well.
I think both this passage and the one we'll look at in a moment really also give us a reminder of the particular time and place and identity that Jesus occupies. Jesus is Jewish. Jesus has grown up in this area. Jesus looks to the temple as the house of God. Jesus looks to Jerusalem as the holy city. There is a connection here with the Old Testament and the covenant language of God and God's people and a holy land that is very tangible, very observable, and really important in this story. Jesus weeps over this city that is to be the place of knowledge of God's work. It is to be the place that is centered in God's saving grace and saving action. This is to be the home of faith, the home base. In fact, it will serve as the home base for Luke in the story of Acts, the book of Acts, and the story of the church going out. And here Jesus sees that instead of filling that calling, they have missed it. And Jesus foresees a day in which they will suffer, where that will be taken from them. But again, how aware at this moment is Jesus or Luke of the destruction of the temple? That's kind of a Bible scholar argument, and they certainly, you can read those for days. But here, Jesus has a heartfelt moment of grief for what should have been true and wasn't. And I liken this, Michael, to, whenever we attend a funeral service, we inevitably grieve for something that isn't going to happen now because those possibilities are gone. And Jesus here, I think, has that sense to his words, that this bridge has been crossed and Jerusalem isn't what it should have been. And Jesus is going to willingly pay the price for that, but pay the price nonetheless. And I think this really is a profound moment in the gospel.
And interestingly, this story does connect to some of the earlier stories in Luke. Especially here, verse 42. If only had recognized on this day the things that make for peace. And the angels come proclaiming the peace of God. There's this theme throughout Luke that the kingdom of God brings peace. The irony here at Jesus' arrival in the city is not only that the people have heard, or in this case, the text says, did not recognize the time of visitation, so they didn't see or understand that visitation. The interesting facet of that is they have missed the opportunity to see God's ultimate kingdom come to them, though that's what they've been looking for. This city represents for the nation of Israel the throne of David. The hope at this time in history would be the restoration of their national identity, that they might be the people that God promised them that they would be. And here, Luke makes it absolutely clear that Jesus sees the disjunction of this moment, that he, the true first Son of God, as we see later in the epistles, the one who represents the full glory of God, stands inside God's city. And all of the people there who have been waiting this whole time for the restoration of the kingdom, for things to be made right again, for ultimate peace on earth, they not only miss Jesus, but they're going to not see that peace in their own lived lifetime. They're going to see destruction. They're going to see that city fall to ruins. And that is, maybe in some sense we might look at that as an Old Testament voice of judgment, that the city will pay for the fact that they missed the one who came to save them. There's also just a simple fact of history that it will be upon that moment that, as Luke will tell the story in Acts, that the gospel is then sent out or thrust out of the city of Jerusalem. And that's the amazing sort of movement. We have to remember that Luke and Acts are part 1 and part 2. So much of Jesus's life and ministry go towards the salvific work he will accomplish in and just outside of Jerusalem. And then the church's work, led by the power of the Spirit in the book of Acts, are going to once again culminate in the Spirit being shed or being given in Jerusalem, and then that being the engine upon which that Spirit is then thrust out across the entire world. And Jerusalem is no longer going to be the center of God's work in the world. That peace is going to come from Jerusalem ultimately, though the city itself will be destroyed in an act of violence. And that's the kind of disjunctive things happening in this text all at one time.
This text and the next one here that we'll read, I think both have a sense of justice. One is national and one is much smaller. The centerpiece of Jerusalem for Jewish people is indeed the temple. And so no surprise that it is the first place that Jesus shows up. A little bit interesting that for all Luke's passion about money and for all of Luke's emphasis on material wealth and the rich and the poor, in some ways he tells us the simplest version of this story, which is in other Gospels, but in Luke it's really only 2 verses long. So let me read it, we'll come back to it. Then Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling things there. He said, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching in the temple, The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him. But they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were spellbound by what they heard. So you may know this in first century Jerusalem, there is a large economy tied to the temple. People would come in for festivals like the Passover, which is happening here at the time Jesus is there. And rather than bring sacrificial animals with them, they would bring money. They would buy those animals at the temple. There were stables, there were pens. As a part of the temple, there were people who kept those animals. And they would also trade money. You could not use Roman money at the temple, so there was a money changers, literally, like when you travel and you trade dollars for pesos or for francs or for euros or whatever it is. That was happening there at the temple. And of course, they are there to make some profit. And so when Jesus encounters this in the Passion of Holy Week, he reacts to it also passionately, less obvious in this, but John almost suggests he reacts violently to it. We don't have that language here of turning over tables or making a whip, but in the other versions of this story, Jesus does, he's a little bit more disruptive. Here he just begins running them out, saying this should be a house of prayer. And again, what is the idea here? Mourning. This is not what it should be. It is supposed to be this, but you've made it this instead. Now, again, Luke loves that language. Luke is always interested in stories that involve money and the temptation of money. But here, just a very simple telling of it, as Jesus is so moved with anger and frustration at what they're doing to the temple, what they're doing to worship, that he cannot help but react and does so aggressively.
And Luke not only cares about money, but Luke cares about power. And I think it's worth noting here specifically what Luke has to say about this. It is the chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people that are actively looking for a way to kill him. This, for Luke, is a departure from some of those stories that we've had before. We've said this last week, that the Pharisees were very much left at the door of Jerusalem. Now, as Jesus comes into the center of Israelite life, it is now the chief priests. It's the top brass of the temple, and it's the leaders of the people in the very cosmopolitan center of Jewish life, Jerusalem. These are the ones who've now turned their attention to and ultimately against Jesus. Clint, this is really meaningful. Jesus is now making enemies in very, very high places, and Luke is making clear to us that Jesus is not only angered by the injustice of people who are poor paying a tax rate or a fee to be able to worship God. Jesus is also, at this moment, inciting the very anger and rage of the people who have the power and motive and ultimately the success in bringing Jesus to the point of crucifixion, of death. He's now dealing with the highest level of the people, the leaders of the country. And we might miss that, right? But this would be akin to someone going to the center of power in our own culture. I suppose that would be going to something like a Washington, D.C., or maybe your state capital, and there staging a kind of protest and doing so with the very people who are exercising the seats of power and authority there. Those are the people who have the most means and capability of doing something about it. And that's ultimately what is going to happen to Jesus. So that's the interesting thing that Luke is doing in a story like this, is he's simultaneously giving us the facts that Jesus goes, he's moved by the injustice and he responds to it. And also, more practically, Jesus is now making enemies in very high places, and he's doing so at a very tense moment in Jewish life. This is a very, if you know your history, this is also a time where Rome and the Roman occupiers, the military, were at greatest odds with the Jews, because this was a season, Passover was a season where historically there are very many records of both small and large revolts of people sort of standing up and pushing back against Roman power and authority. And so this is a tense moment already in Jerusalem when you've got a person going in and driving out the people who make one of the busiest times of the year in the temple the most profitable times of the year in the temple, that's going to get noticed, and it's going to result in some big things, as Luke is going to show us later.
I don't think that this is obvious in the text, but there are some scholars who suggest that in putting this event on the Holy Week, the Monday of Holy Week typically is when we believe this happened. As you read it in the Gospels, there are those who suggest that this single event, the cleansing of the temple, is the kind of last straw, that this is what really sort of signs Jesus's warrant, that it is in reaction to disrupting the temple, to acting out, to lashing out, that this is what sets the now inescapable course toward the cross. That when Jesus does this, the Pharisees, the priests, the high-standing officials in Jerusalem who are Jewish, they now decide once and for all, this guy has got to go, and that this event moves that forward the most. And again, I don't think you can get that from the text itself. I'm not sure that it's that clear, but it is an interesting suggestion. It is clear that everybody mentions this first, and it does set the tone for the week. And so whatever else it is a passionate display from Jesus that worship is to be about God. And that's where I think if we talk about the applicability of a text like this, Michael, it seems a long time ago and far away and very strange. There's animals being bought and sold. But effectively, this reminds us that Jesus stands against any effort to make the church and worship about something other than the God who calls us to do it. And I think in that sense, it's also a good devotional text.
Well, this is maybe part of why this text is difficult for us reading it thousands of years later, and most of us not reading it from a Jewish cultural framework. Clint, this is the center of Jewish life. This is the most core aspect of what it means to be standing in the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to be in David and Solomon's temple after destruction and reconstruction, all these things. But this is a center of national identity. It's the core of what they consider to be their cultural heritage. And it's in this place where Jesus, who's been teaching this whole time, we've heard Jesus talking about how God's kingdom is coming for all people. We've heard the expansiveness of this grace. It's already been included in Luke. That's not an accident. But there's that thing that happens for humans, Clint, where we hear a thing and we say, okay, yeah, maybe he's just pushing his point, or I understand, that's interesting. But when Jesus shows up at the temple and he puts action to that teaching, when he talks about that kingdom being God's kingdom and not David's kingdom, it's God's kingdom, that is the moment in which everything turns. The people see that Jesus' teaching even goes to the center of that sort of cultural life at the temple. And it's ultimately all about God. It has been for Jesus the whole time. And I think that you could look at a story like this and see that now everyone else is being able to catch a grasp of how seriously Jesus meant that. And when they come into that realization, it raises the stakes and it angers very powerful people. And like you've said, I think very helpfully, it creates the path upon which Jesus is now going to walk to the end.
Yeah, obviously, I think if you want to get people mad at you, you go to the money. You disrupt the income. You disrupt the flow. That's a powerful statement that Jesus makes, and it's not a surprise that his enemies react strongly to it. Luke starts off hot. Now we'll back off a little bit and we'll kind of slow burn through the rest of the week for a couple of chapters, but hope you can be with us because Luke has now set us on the path of kind of the last part of the story, and I think is certainly the culmination for the way that he writes it.
If you made it this far, we hope that there's been something encouraging for you. If there has, give this video a like. And if you'd like to stick with us as we go through studies just like this one, please subscribe so that you can get videos as they come out. That said, until we see you tomorrow or whenever it is, be blessed.